an hour for this webinar. So I say welcome to all participants and welcome to the people from Pentera. They're gonna introduce themselves as soon as I'm done with my very short presentation, and welcome. Today we're gonna talk about Pantera and have a demo as well, how the system works. If you have any questions during the presentation, just drop them in the chat and we can take them as long as we go or after the whole presentation. So with that said, I will hand over to Anders at Pantera, so he will introduce himself.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for having us. So my name is Anders. I don't know if I met anybody participating before, but I'm managing the channel basically. So I'm working with SciDAC and managing the channel in the Nordics and the Baltics. Been with Pantera since June last year. Have been working with Pantera as a platform though for slightly over 2 years, like 2.5 years. I have Sion, the ghost on my shoulder. Yeah, on my shoulder, with me today, and Sion will present himself, of course. Former pen tester, joined Pentera 5 years ago, working at our headquarters in Tel Aviv. And the things, yeah, you know, basically everything that needs to be known about Pentera. Yeah. So I will start out with a short introduction of Pentera in some PowerPoint. I will try to keep it for 10 minutes or something, and then I will hand over to Sion to hit it away with a lot of demo. And feel free, as Peter said, if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A. We can catch them on the fly. So feel free to address whatever questions or idea you might have during the presentation or the webinar. So let's see if we can share the screen and we can have everything up and running. So I will share the whole screen basically. And then I will, oops, I need to run this one. Sion, please help me. Yeah. There we go. Oh, there we go. So can you see it? Can you see the presentation? Perfect, perfect, perfect. So Pantera and what Pantera is all about. Pantera is redefining security validation. I know that some people have heard different views of what Pantera is. You might have heard like automated pen testing, etc. But what we really do is validating security. And I will explain why. And Sion will also, of course, show it later in the demo. So by that said, let's see if I can move it. Yeah, there we go. So the mission statement that we have is to improve our customer security readiness against cyber threats and by emulating real attacks. So, oh, what are you doing? Okay. So that's our mission statement. So we are like we don't have any competition yet. There is some vendors trying to catch up, but we are really the first company in the market that do real attacks or enable the customers to do real attacks on themselves to make sure that you will how well you are defended against cyber attacks, basically. So we will look at everything from vulnerabilities, dynamic vulnerabilities like misconfigurations, how the security systems work, etc. So it's basically validating the whole IT security stack. And the founding story and why Pentera exists is because of this guy, Arik, the founder and CDO at Pentera. He is a former pen test lead, like state nation pen tester, managing a team within the Israeli Defense Force. And a few years back, he and the team, of course, were trying to work more and more efficient, try to create smart scripts in order to continuously do penetration tests on themselves. And what they found out was that they were able to create a smart machine, because everything nowadays are automated. Maybe you see it in the security solutions you have already. Maybe you have some automation in the CM, in the SOC. So everything is going with automation these days. So they started to create a smart machine that could do the heavy lift for them, so they can run pen tests more frequently, like every day, to validate their security systems and their IT environments. And that's the embryo of Pentera, basically. So they founded the company in 2015, and the first product was released in 2018. One of the first customers was Blackstone in the US. They really saw the potential and the value that Pantera bring. So they invested in Pantera, and then they also invested in Pantera as a company as well. So we have great funding. We are moving towards the NASDAQ stock exchange within a few years. We are slightly over 300 employees at the moment. In the Nordics, we are about 6 employees now. So we're growing, the team is growing. And slightly over 700 customers as we speak. And we serve basically all verticals. So we see the need in most companies to be able to validate the IT security, basically. So we are a fit in all verticals, basically. And one of the questions that we answer is that, do your cyber defense truly work? Because you have a lot of security products in your IT environments, different brands. You maybe have some smartness on top with CMs and all these kind of solutions to consolidate the logging and take smart decisions to understand what's happening in the infrastructure. But to really know that all these security products you have in production are really working, that's a hard task. You can do, of course, some manual pen testing, etc., to really test those systems, but it's really hard to do it over time and do it continuously. So that's one thing that we are aiming at. And the next thing is, since we are focused on both internal infrastructure when it comes to endpoints, internal networks, it can be a hybrid environment as well. You might have some local data center, local offices, networks, etc. You also might have some part of the IT environment in the cloud. Doesn't matter. That's internal infrastructure for us. You have the external one with everything that you expose to the internet, like services you provide to customer and partners, etc. So we look at it from two different perspectives. And on both sides, of course, you have security controls in place to secure those environments. And you might have some smartness, as I mentioned before, on top to actually understand what's going on. The thing with monitoring or smart logging systems or PM systems is that it will show what the endpoint and network controls basically sees. But it doesn't really answer the question about the true exposure of an organization. Where are the true risks? It's really hard to find those. And that's a question that we also are addressing with Pantera. Some customers might have moved into vulnerability-centric security. So when you have all the security products in place, you take the next step, trying to work with vulnerability management, trying to find the vulnerabilities in the environment, mostly static ones, and try to have a great process handling vulnerabilities. But as you know, there are thousands of vulnerabilities, new vulnerabilities every year. It's really hard to pinpoint which ones, because it's only a few of them that can actually be exploited by a hacker. It's really hard to know which vulnerabilities that would have an impact in your organization. And we look at ransomware, a hot topic. It's even less. It's less than 1% of the vulnerabilities out there that actually are utilized by ransomware groups in order to make successful, or successful attack. So if you could pinpoint which vulnerabilities that could actually cause harm in your organization, that would be good, right? And the last part, when it comes to challenges, I will jump ahead. Are these three things. It's usually a customer or organization have a visibility gap. And there are things that you know about your organization that a hacker doesn't. There's usually an overlap where a hacker might know things that you already know. And usually there is things that a hacker knows or sees that you're not aware of. So it's a challenge to bridge the gap, to be able to look at your own organization as a hacker, to get their perspective as well. So the visibility will be 100%. Nothing is 100%, but 99-ish. And also when it comes to how to prioritize what to fix in the environment. Usually you look at vulnerabilities, you sort them by criticality or CVSS scoring, you try to patch those, but an attacker might have another angle, another view of things. They might use misconfigurations, treat users, take the low-hanging fruits, vulnerabilities not that known, not that critical, that they can exploit to cause harm. So we also look at this from a hacker perspective to be able to understand what a hacker could utilize in the environment. So you can prioritize your IT security work in the right way. And the last part is validation. So not only finding a vulnerability in the environment, but actually be able to exploit it and see that it's a confirmed impact. So instead of just scanning for vulnerabilities that might be a problem, you can actually, with Pantera, validate which ones can actually be exploited and what could a hacker do utilizing the exploits that we find. It can also be other things. Let's say that we will find a misconfiguration in the environment, making it possible for a hacker to sniff credentials in the environment, or we find a way to bypass an EDR system. With this information and knowledge that you get from Pantera, you can patch systems, you can change configurations, and then afterwards you can utilize Pantera again to validate that the improvements that you did in the IT environment actually is working. Like patching print nightmare or making a change in the segmentation or whatever it might be. You can use Pantera over and over again to validate that you're doing the right things. So the platform, I think I will be able to conclude this in 10 minutes. So the Pantera platform is focused on security validation, as I mentioned, and it's a two-side coin. It's one part that will cover the internal core network, like your local infrastructure, and one part that is focused on the external attack surface. But they are in the same platform, but it's two different products, you can say. But our goal is to add more and more features so we can really validate everything at the customer from the inside out. And in short, what you do when you're using Pantera is that you usually set up some different scopes, different scenarios, hacking scenarios. What if someone, a hacker, would be accessing this client network? What could happen? What if, and so on. So you set up some different testing scenarios, and for every scenario that you run, you can schedule them and run them continuously. Pantera will look at the organization with a hacker perspective. So let's say that we have a scenario where assume that someone got into a client network, plugged in a Raspberry Pi machine, or took over a laptop from an employee or whatever it might be. You can look at it from a hacker perspective. So Pantera will not crawl the whole infrastructure for vulnerabilities. We will within a certain scenario, we will see what a hacker could be causing from that point of view, basically. So we will look for assets that we can find, servers, clients, network, devices, whatever it might be. We'll look for vulnerabilities, yes, but we only look for the ones that are exploitable, that a hacker could utilize in some way. It's no false positives showing all the vulnerabilities that might be a problem, or, yeah, you know. And then we start to validate those. So we actually try to exploit the vulnerabilities that we find. It's totally agentless, so you can run Pantera in different setups, but you can have like one machine that you run it on, or you can have several nodes, but we don't need to dig into that too deep. But it's basically, you don't need an agent on all clients and servers. It's fully automatic, autonomous, so you can run Pantera fully autonomous, or you can choose to do it semi-manual if you want, or semi-automatic, sorry. So you can choose what to run and when, and if you want to address a specific system or whatever you want. And we do it in real environments, so it's not a simulation. You don't do it in a lab. You can run it in real production environment without causing any harm. And the output that you will get um, is what to prioritize. When we are able to do different attack vectors, we will show you what the root causes are. Where did Pantera start? What was the root cause for each and every attack? So you can prioritize and fix things in the right way. And we will not only do that, we will also show you how to remediate. If it's a patch, if it's a reconfiguration, whatever it might be, we will tell you this root cause will, if you fix this one, it will have the best impact, and this is the way you do it. Okay, and we do it together, of course, with our partner SIDAC, so you can have their help to actually remediate things afterwards. And the way Pantera works, it's like imitating a hacker. So when you run Pantera in your environment, Pantera will do a network recon. We will see from that point of view, in that scope scenario, what we can see, what we can find, server clients, printers, or wherever it might be. We do some vulnerability assessment to see if we find static vulnerabilities on those machines. At the same time, we start to sniff in the network, like imitate a hacker, try to get hold of credentials flying around in a network. We try to crack those using different techniques. At the same time, we do relay techniques. So we will, if we find a credential, we will see if we can use it elsewhere, try to relay ourselves into other systems. We do malware injections, ethical ones, not causing any harm. And we do it both to test the local EDR, for instance, on a machine, but also to get a better traction on a machine, to download a payload in order to do something else, like a hacker would. We try to move around in the network, so you can actually test the segmentation, both from machine to machine or from one network to another. And we do privileged escalation, which means that if we get hold of an account, we are able to access that directory. We're able to create a new domain admin or whatever it might be. So we try to get as deep into the environment as possible. And after a test, you don't have to wait 2 weeks or whatever for a penetration pen tester to get back to you with a report. I know that Sion did this back in the days. Actually, you would get a report seconds after a validation run, and it can be a run for a couple of hours up to a couple of days, depending on the scenario and the scope, how big it is, etc. And Pentera will also clean everything up afterwards. And then you can schedule it and run again the next day or week or every month or whatever you want. Before leaving to Sion, I have 2 more slides, the last ones. So basically the problem we solve for the customers is to work with IT security over time. Usually when we start to work with a customer, we will find some issues, some problems. We, together with the customer and SITAC, we will remediate those so we get under your acceptable risk level. But then over time, things happen. Networks are always changing. You might have new hosts in the environment causing a new problem. You merge or connect another network. You do a policy change in some IT security product or in the network itself or whatever it might be, that opens up a new opportunity for a hacker, a new vulnerability of some sort. By running it continuously, you are able to find all these issues when they happen and fix them immediately. So you don't have to wait for the pen test that is going to happen in 11 months. You can run it continuously, find the problems, and remediate as soon as possible. Last one, before I hand it over to Sion, is just to show the platform. And of course, Sion will show you how it looks like. But what we have in short is Pantera core that is locally installed on-prem at the customer. It can cover both like a hybrid environment, so it can be locally and also looking at the cloud. But it's focused on, it's focused on the local infrastructure. We have Pantera Surface that is hosted by Pantera, addressing all external facing assets and see what problems it might be there. And on top, we have 2 modules so far. More is coming. The first one we released was ransomware ready, which is a feature that actually emulates, not simulates, real ransomware campaigns. So you can run it safe on yourself. We basically do all the steps that the different ransomware families does. So everything from, if it's possible, to get into machine, to get hold of files, to encrypt the files, to filtrate the data, to connect to a command and control, basically all the steps. So you can find if you have any devices in the environment that are vulnerable to ransomware. Maybe most of them are covered, but might be 1 or 2 machines that don't have the same policy or some other configuration on the EDR or whatever it might be. So you can find those and fix those basically. And the last one that we released late last year is credential exposure. And as you know, credentials are usually, it's a very common way for a hacker to gain initial access. So we invest a lot of time and effort into credential exposure. What it does today is that we harvest credentials linked to your specific, your domain, so to speak. So we harvest them on internet, deep web, darknet, and we're not just sending a list of lead credentials. We actually use them to see if we can utilize those credentials to get into external facing assets. We correlated the information to the Active Directory to see if there are there are accounts out in the wild that could actually be used to access something. So we highlight the accounts at risk so you can remediate those basically, and tons of other features. But in short, that's what credential exposure is all about. So Theon, I'm handing over to you. We only have 1 share, so we're going to switch seats. Any questions so far? I didn't see the chat.
No, not so far.
That is probably good.
I wonder if you can show a little bit about the reports that you will get out of the system in the end, because I think that's really interesting because you get 1 report for, let's say, C-level and 1 report for very technical persons. Yep. So I think that's a really good thing to show.
Definitely. Yeah, thank you for that point. One of the things that I will show is, of course, the results of what we've been talking about, because what is good as a pen test or validation if you don't have a report that's actionable and you can use for remediation. So we will discuss this. What we're going to do now is I'm going to show a demo of Pantera Core, the internal part, as we said, and dive into how it works, what it can do, and show you the results, of course, as you asked Peter at the end, the various types of reports. When looking at what Pantera can do, we have 3 operation modes, which we call testing scenarios. These 3 options can be configured and used by organizations to support literally almost an unlimited number of use cases based on what is relevant or important to an organization. Starting from the left, we have black box. Similar to the concept with a manual penetration test, Pantera will start with no credentials, no pre-existing knowledge about the network, and will, as Andrew said earlier, will try to perform, for example, privilege escalation and ultimately reach wherever it can. Before I continue, one of the important things to talk about with regards to Pantera and how it's different than manual penetration testing is that during the duration of the scenario, the time that Pantera will work, it will continuously try to perform any and all techniques, tactics, procedures, actions that it can with the information found. A manual penetration test is more to the direction of a capture the flag activity. There are targets, there are specific processes or use cases which are the pen testers are trying to validate, whereas Pantera, since it's a machine, can do so continuously and with many more options than what can be done manually. And I'm saying this from personal experience. Gray box, again, similar to manual penetration testing. With gray box, you can provide credentials, local, domain, service, web, provide credentials to Pentera to validate use cases. What would happen if an attacker obtained the CEO's personal assistant's credentials? What would he or she be able to do? Or you would be able to target Pentera to search for files or content inside files using that scenario. One of my personal favorites is the targeted testing option, or the targeted testing scenarios, which Anders mentioned earlier that we have several modules here. I like to call the targeted testing scenarios the red teamer's dream, because you have multiple ready-made scenarios that you can run to validate various use cases. First, ransomware, right? Let's perform real and real ransomware campaigns in a network, Maze, Conti, Revil, Lockbit 2.0, and of course we continuously add more and more, where Pentera will perform, as Anders said, all the IOCs, the indicators of compromise that build up a ransomware campaign. If it's, like he said, the encryption of files, exfiltration, and so on, but also changes to registry, or deletion of the shadow copy service, and so on, various things that are performed during the ransomware attacks, which allow organizations to truly validate, are there EDRs, NDRs, any tool that is supposed to protect against malware, are they performing as they should? What about the web attack surface? So organizations have, well, almost an unlimited number of systems that nowadays are accessed through the web, and Pentera can validate these as well. Mapped to the OWASP top 10, but not only, because as you may know, the top 10 fluctuates every year or so. So we cover as many OWASP risks as we can, and of course, continuously add support for more and more. The Active Directory Password Strength Assessment, ADPA for short, right? It's a mouthful saying it, the whole thing, is a validation scenario which does not include attacks. It will connect to a domain controller, download the database of passwords, of credentials that exist in the domain, and start trying to crack them. Ultimately, providing a report with how strong is the password policy, who is evading the policy in some way, which passwords are weak, and others. But with the addition of the credential exposure module, what you can do now is truly validate, are credentials that were leaked from your organizations still or really putting you at risk? Can they be used to do something? And one of the main differentiators that we see with Pantera, as opposed to any other platform or tool that will collect leaked credentials, is that Pantera makes the threat intelligence actionable. It will use those leaked credentials, try to gain access in any way it can, ultimately giving a report. Yes, Sion's credentials have been leaked and they are putting the organization at risk. Other options are also available, for example, performing vulnerability scanning focused on the either the exploitable ones or a generic standard vulnerability scan, but less interesting because it's not performing the real exploitation. For today, I want to show you a black box, where you will see that one of the things that are important to us, let's say the vendor, the developer of Pantera, is to make it as easy as possible to use. You don't need, let's say, a certified penetration tester to run Pantera. And hopefully you'll agree as you see the configuration and the results. The first things, so name and description, just to understand what we're going to do. And then you provide the scope. The scope here can be as large or as small as you want based on the use case. Currently, I'm providing 2 networks, 2 different subnets, if you will. There we go. And you know what? I'm going to exclude one of them just to show you that it's possible. Imagine having a network with servers, but some of them are sensitive or legacy, and you know that you want to exclude them. Here you go. You can do that. Duration is something that's very important. It allows organizations to support, like I said, many use cases. And it also allows organizations to validate where they're weak or where they're strong during the week or over the weekend or during holidays or whenever, together with our scheduling, which I'll show in a bit. As you can see, the configuration is by default 1 day, 24 hours. And here's one of my favorite features in Pantera. This, the stealthiness level slider, allows the user to configure how noisy or how stealthy Pantera will be during the scenario. Now, why do we have that option? Several reasons. First of all, that's one of the main concepts in Pantera is safety. Like doctors, do no harm, the Hippocratic Oath. Pantera has the same concept. It will try to be as loud, as noisy as possible on the network, but in a safe manner, right? You will be able to decide which level of stealthiness, but the important thing to note here is that we develop the engine. We do not use any industry standard one, that's maybe Nmap or others that are used by manual pen testers. And because we developed it ourselves, we know that even on the noisiest level, there's not going to be undue noise or congestion on the network. What's the cool thing about this feature in addition? Organizations can use this to validate that their detection tools, that their incident response protocols, that their CM and SOC teams are indeed collecting all the information, all the action, all the traffic that Pantera is generating. Now, if they start at the noisiest level, make sure they find everything and go stealthier and do the same, and so on and so on. Ultimately, fine-tuning those tools, those defenses, to be ready for a real, let's say, or a malicious attack by a hacker. These configurations, as you can see, are already pre-configured to allow for easy deployment of the scenario. But I will touch upon this, require approval for exploits, another safety feature. Similar to the rules of engagement of a manual penetration test, this feature would ask the user, can Pantera perform a specific action? An intrusive, let's say, or exploitative action, injecting a payload, brute forcing a password, and so on. This checkbox is basically the differentiator between fully automated and semi-automated, as Anders mentioned earlier. Scheduling. Sadly, the world, most of organizations, if at all, have an annual penetration test. And if you remember that slide that Anders showed, that risk level over time, unless you continuously validate and check, is your organization vulnerable, or I would say actually exploitable? Oh, what use is a once in a year penetration test, right? So with Pantera, you can mitigate that risk. You can continuously, per schedule, based on what your business use cases and your priorities, allow Pantera to validate the organization. For example, like I said a few minutes ago, what happens over holidays, weekends, overnight? Human pen testers don't validate or don't work during those times, usually. So with Pantera, you can cover those blind spots, those times in the year when no one's doing anything, right? Of course, you would get notifications, right? You can sip Mai Tais on the beach in the Caribbean and get the notifications of what's going on. And if or when you want, also perform the remediation, which we'll see. I'm going to create and run right now. And Pantera starts. On the right, you can see that we have a timer. Now, it's not important or critical, but it is interesting to note that it will show you how the fact that Pantera is a machine allows it to have improved scale, improved larger scope, and so on, than what we're used to in a manual penetration test. Having said that, as a former pen tester, I will say Pantera is not here to replace pen testers. It's here to empower them if pen testers exist in an organization and not only externally, and allows them to become much more efficient, faster, and so on. Okay, now in the middle here, you can see current activity, which will show how, I would say, what Pantera is doing in real time. Again, thinking about a manual penetration test, usually the penetration testers, are watching, looking at a dark screen, doing what they do, and the customer will only see the results at the end. But here with Pantera, at any given time, you'll be able to see what Pantera is doing under current activity. Below here, we can see the devices that Pantera has discovered so far. Now remember, it will continue trying to detect and to perform any and all actions in that duration that we configured. And if new machines are added to the network, pop up, and so on, Pantera will find them, or if they're removed, and so on. While Pantera is searching and trying to detect, you may notice that we are starting to get the color blue here. What are these colors? So here you can see vulnerabilities and achievements. The colors denote the level of severity, and that's reflected here. These devices, these hosts, have low-level results on them. They could be vulnerabilities, or they can be achievements. You may notice also that more devices were discovered and that the colors have been changing because Pantera is proceeding with the enumeration process. And when the enumeration process continues, we will see achievements. An achievement is the result of a successful attack action, something that happened in the real world. Pantera was able to do something, right? And in a bit, we'll see what these things are. Okay, gonna let Pantera evolve the attack a bit. And as you can see, the enumeration is also showing the host names of the devices in addition to their IP addresses. This, of course, is allowing Pantera to dig deeper, or it shows how Pantera is collecting more and more information. Now, as with a manual penetration test, this phase can take a few minutes, which is fine. What I would like you to do, if there are any questions now, please put them in the chat. Let's use this time to answer any questions, if there are any. If not, that's fine as well. questions? I can't see any.
Nothing in the chat as well.
Yeah.
So
That's perfect. Either I'm doing a good job or people are shy, but it's fine. We can always have follow-ups after this webinar. You may notice that we already have 2 low-level vulnerabilities here. If you remember what Anders said earlier about vulnerabilities and how Pantera looks at them, so here you can see Pantera does not actually do vulnerability assessment like you're familiar with during the scenario. It will perform the vulnerability analysis, which means that it's searching for exploitable vulnerabilities only, irrespective of the level of severity, because attackers don't care about CVSS. They don't care what severity level it is. And they're actually searching for lower level ones. Why is that? Because as organizations, over the past, I would say more than 2 decades, we have been working based on the assumption that the severity level of the vulnerabilities is what's important. And attackers know this, and they know that as defenders, we will try to protect ourselves and to remediate the critical and high ones. So they say, okay, we're not going to try those ones. We're going to start with the low level ones, which aren't being defended or aren't even being looked at. Think about the vulnerability assessment report you usually see. Thousands of vulnerabilities sorted from critical to low. Where do we start? Whatever's red, whatever's critical. Maybe we reach, if we have time, the high ones. But then new things are, of course, appear all the time. So focusing on what's really putting organizations at risk minimizes the workload, reduces patch fatigue and all the other types of fatigue that organizations face when using, or when not using or performing real attacks and real exploitation. You may have noticed that things have been popping up while I've been talking. For example, one device here is red, which means that we found critical results there. You also may have noticed that achievements have been popping up, or appearing, I should say, with a score here or a number, a severity score. And also on the right side, you can see that we have those approvals waiting. What I'm going to do together with you is review some of these actions, some of those exploitations that Pantera wants to perform, and see what happens. So I can see that here we have Pantera is going to try to use or exploit Print Nightmare to perform escalation of privileges. Nice, let's try that. I can also see that Pantera is going to try to deep dive in the enumeration and get over RDP a lot more information. These pop-ups denote achievements that are happening. So in real time, or as near real time as possible, you're seeing the results. These things popping up, you see my hands are here, I'm not doing anything. Pantera is performing in an autonomous manner all of these actions, which the achievements are the results of them. And I didn't approve anything yet. Nothing intrusive was performed. So let me see that these are the getting information, but I do want to extract credentials from the browser using RDP, using the remote desktop protocol. And let's choose several and approve them. Oops, there we go. Okay, I've approved. And now we can wait and see, and there you go. Results have been, can come in almost immediately, or they can take time, depending on the techniques needed, depending on the actions that Pantera needs to perform in order to perform the exploit. Okay, we'll close this for now. You may have noticed this critical one, this 10. Let's take a look at that and see what the attack vector is. An attack vector is the graphical representation of the kill chain, the actions that the attacker or Pantera took until it reached its in a specific goal. Now, since this is a machine which will continuously work for the duration configured, Pantera will continuously try to find and perform any and all exploits it can based on the information collected, and will continuously collect information. And as you can see, things are happening all the time. A side note, all of these actions, everything that Pentera is doing can be integrated to your SIM platform, and then the SOC team will be able to look and see, okay, Pentera did all of these, succeeded in all of these achievements that you can see. Have we detected? Have we blocked? Have we responded? Whatever is needed based on organizational protocols. If we look at the attack vector, a broken shield, it denotes a vulnerability. You can see we have 2 here, and a trophy is that achievement, that success. Clicking any of these, let's call them boxes, right? You can see several pieces of information. First, the score based on the CVSS calculator. Why is not real CVSS? Because we're looking at a dynamic vulnerability. We're looking at a weakness that does not have a CVE. The vulnerability scanners will not look for this because this is something that is related to a misconfiguration in the network level, not per host. You can see here the calculation if you want, how we decided on the severity. You have remediation, high level, but, and we'll open this and look at it in a moment, you also have detailed remediation. One of the things that our research department does, in addition to adding attacks and exploits and so on, they also provide how to fix. And if I look at there, so this relates that this is the what we call the remediation wiki page for that specific weakness, that vulnerability. You have the MITRE technique related to exploitation of this, the insight or what's the risk, why or what would an attacker do here, impact, how does an attacker perform the exploitation step by step, and also the recommended remediations, as you can see, with screenshots, step by step, multiple ways if possible. Not only, go take that patch, download the patch and install it. No, sometimes yes, but usually we try to give as many other options as possible. Technical enforcement, you start the server, something like that. And then, as Anders said, how to use Pantera for validation. You fix something. Are you going to wait until next year for the pen testers to come back to check if this was fixed? Not anymore. Now you can use Pantera to validate. Going back to the scenario, one of the most important things that you can understand from this scenario is what is the root cause vulnerability. And the root cause vulnerability is what you need to prioritize in the fix. Because if you fix this, and I can simulate fix, nothing is going to really happen here, but this is in a graphical manner, would show you, you fix this one, these achievements, these attack actions won't be possible because in this way, because that is the root cause vulnerability. If I look at this vulnerability, same thing, I could simulate the fix. Oh, but it's not going to prevent this achievement. So it helps understand what to prioritize. You can see every step of the way, the information, the details. You can see that Pantera was able to grab, or in this situation, this achievement, crack that user's hash. Pantera is safe, remember, so it will validate those credentials before using them and, God forbid, locking out any accounts. And ultimately, it will show you that it got the domain admin's account password in clear text. Let's go a bit over the results and so on, but Pantera will continue, right? It's only 13 minutes in, or almost 14. The vulnerabilities report, to me, is one of the most critical ones. Well, to me, is to Pantera. Why is that? Severity here, based on CVSS, right? Based on what any vulnerability scanner would do. But look at this. We added remediation priority, where Pantera will show what to fix first, right? And here we're looking at a 4.7. Wow, why 4.7? Here's a 10. Why aren't we fixing that first? Let's understand. First of all, this vulnerability affects the entire domain. Secondly, it's the root cause vulnerability of many of the vectors, while as this one is probably the result on the bottom of the vector. There are multiple calculations that go into the decisions of the remediation priority, but those are the main things. What's the real impact? If an attacker exploits this vulnerability, what would allow them to do down the chain? Pantera also has an actions log outlining every single action it performs, successful or not. And this is also mapped, of course, to MITRE. So with that integration, let's say with a SIM platform, you can always correlate and understand where you're weak, where you're strong, what you need to improve, and how. Map to MITRE, right? So here you can see contextual, in this scenario, what Pantera did, which techniques or sub-techniques were used. And the one of the most important things, again, in my mind, is the footprints report. When Pantera succeeds in injecting files, you will see details here. When it succeeds in creating users or obtaining the user's information, you will see it here. See, Pantera tried to created, this account on this machine. It has not removed it yet because it's still using it. And if Pantera creates any services or scheduled tasks, you'll see that as well. Now, going back to the live screen, I can see that there are 265 approvals, 265 actions that Pantera can perform just on about 20-ish devices here. So imagine what would happen, in a larger scope. To give you just a taste of what Pantera can do, you can see Pantera can harvest credentials, perform credential extraction, install hooking malware, which is really cool because Pantera will install code into running processes, which would then propagate the attack. And so on. And of course, like I said earlier, this is contextual based on the information that Pantera collected until now. It will update as time goes on, as you can see. Yeah, rest my case, as they say. And here below, we can see a lot of color. We started with gray somethings, right? Gray devices 17 minutes ago. Okay. Last, but definitely not least, I want to show you reports. Now, since this scenario is running, I need to stop it. I'll show you from here. I can stop it, which would cause Pantera to start going into cleanup and then removal of anything, and then the report would be generated. But since I want to show you several reports here, I'll use this one. The same environment, but you can get different results, right? Because networks are dynamic. So every time you might get something else. Here you can see in this scenario, Pantera created its own domain admin account. It's cool to see in action. But let's look at the report. There are two types of reports that Pantera can generate to PDF. One is the detailed report, which we're looking at now. And one is the executive report, which would contain the executive summary, which we can see here. Every scenario would receive a score, A to C, as you can see here. You get details about the scenario, what was configured, and notice this, a date. So over time, you would be able to know how the security of your network is either improving or not. You would be able to see a resilience scorecard, which is the reason for that score, good things or bad things happening. You would be able to see the host findings, which devices were found, which were taken over by Pantera. The live host table, what was detected, any antivirus or EDR bypass events, credentials and passwords and the compromised accounts, how were they found, in which way, the cracking of those passwords, if successful, how fast, at what level, the accounts that were compromised, and the vulnerabilities. Remember the vulnerabilities report I showed you earlier? Here you go. Here's the remediation priority. in this report, which can be sent to the remediation teams, right? Here you go. This is what you need to do. Ultimately, at the end of the report, those remediation articles will also be there. So they can get a report which shows what the level is, or risk level, or exposure level, why it's at that level, what to fix, and how to fix. I'll rush it a bit. I see we have 3 more minutes. You would also have the achievements, of course, that Pantera was successfully achieved in that scenario. You would see the MITRE attack framework that is relevant for that specific scenario as well. And in the appendix, you would be able to see any vectors that you want to add to show. Feedback from our customers says that companies using Pentera, it becomes so much easier for them to explain to higher ups what to fix, why, and so on. You know, fixing a 4.7, why? What? It doesn't usually make sense to people who are used to fixing the critical ones. So here you can see why. And of course, other details here as an appendix shows what actions were approved and so on. I'm going to stop here. We have 2 minutes left and hand it over back to you, Peter.
Okay, sure. Thank you for that presentation. We usually don't add many products to our portfolio. If we do, it has to be something very special, and that's why we chose to work with Pantera, because we think it's a really good and unique product. So we think it's really fun to work with you. And thank you for this hour, for spending this hour in our little webinar.